I was dragged out of the building like a criminal. Cuffs on my wrists. My name echoing in whispers. Eyes burning into my back. It all happened in seconds. One moment, I was sipping burnt coffee in the guard booth, checking cameras, bored out of my mind. The next, I was being shoved against a wall, 2 cops telling me I was under arrest for grand larceny. "What the hell are you talking about?" I shouted. I didn't take anything. They didn't care. They already had their mind made up. The warehouse was short $200,000 worth of electronics. And they said I was the only one with access the night it happened. I was the perfect suspect. No priors. No enemies. Just a guy doing his job, clocking in and out, trying to keep his life together. But someone wanted me gone. And I had no idea why. All I knew was this. If they pinned this on me, I was finished. And the only person in the world who still believed in me was my wife. Her name was Claire. And she would go to hell and back to clear my name. Claire didn't cry when she saw me in the holding cell. She didn't scream, didn't collapse, didn't even blink. She stood there, calm but burning inside like a quiet storm gathering force. Her hand found mine through the cold metal bars and she whispered, "You didn't do this. And I'm going to prove it." I believed her. But belief wasn't going to save me from a judge, a prosecutor, and a stack of circumstantial evidence taller than I was. According to the security footage, the same system I was responsible for, there was a window of 37 minutes during which the cameras had gone dark. 37 minutes where $200,000 worth of top-tier electronics disappeared from the loading dock. And according to their records, I was the only employee logged on duty. My access card was used to open the loading bay. My patrol log showed I'd been in that area around the same time. It looked airtight. But Claire? Claire didn't buy it. "They're setting you up," she said. "And whoever did this was smart. But not smarter than me." She was right. Claire had always been the brain in our marriage. While I worked nights, she worked days at a private investigations firm, the kind that didn't show up in Yelp searches or advertise on billboards. Her specialty was digital forensics. She could find a trail of breadcrumbs in a forest fire. When we first met, I used to joke that she could probably find Jimmy Hoffa in a weekend. Now, I was praying that brilliance could keep me out of prison. That night, while I sat in a cell staring at a blank wall, Claire started digging. She began with the security system. The building used an outsourced surveillance service, cheap, glitchy, and, as Claire had warned me a dozen times, a liability waiting to explode. She accessed the off-site backup server, the one no one else at the company even remembered existed, and found something that stopped her heart cold, a login from a remote IP address during the blackout period. Someone had tampered with the cameras, but not from inside the building. It was remote, intentional, calculated, and it wasn't me. Claire barely slept that night. She wasn't just trying to prove my innocence, she was racing against time. The arraignment was in 3 days, and the DA's office was treating the case like a slam dunk. They had the motive: I was behind on mortgage payments, our credit cards were maxed out, and the hospital bills from Claire's surgery the year before had drained our savings. They had the opportunity: I was alone in the building. And now, thanks to the doctored logs and missing footage, they had what looked like hard evidence. But Claire knew the truth. She could feel it in her bones. "They picked the wrong guy," she said. "And I'm going to make them regret it." Her next move was risky. She went to my boss, Anthony Carver, the warehouse manager. A smug, heavy-set man with too much cologne and a habit of calling Claire sweetheart even when she glared at him. Claire played dumb, asked him questions like a concerned wife. How long had the cameras been glitchy? Who else had access? Was there a backup to the backup? He brushed her off with practiced ease, like someone who'd rehearsed his answers 100 times. But Claire noticed something. When she mentioned the remote login, he flinched. Barely. Just a flicker. But enough. Later that day, she hacked into his work laptop. She didn't tell me how, she never told me how she did the things she did, and I never asked. All I know is, within hours, she found a hidden folder buried in his user data. Encrypted, renamed, disguised. But Claire cracked it open like a walnut. Inside, there were copies of warehouse invoices altered. Fake shipments. Ghost orders. It was a pattern. Small things at first. 1 tablet here. 2 phones there. But it escalated. Then came the night of the big heist, the night I was on duty. $200,000 in high-end gear. And it had all been moved out under my name. Claire stared at the screen for a long time, her hands shaking. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "He's been doing this for months." And then she found the final nail in the coffin, an email chain between Carver and someone from an auction site, setting up a delivery schedule for the stolen goods. Payment in crypto. A meetup across state lines. Claire copied everything. Screenshots, logs, timestamps. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person who could make it all count, Officer Delaney, the only cop on the case who hadn't treated me like garbage. I have proof, she told him. But you need to move fast. Officer Delaney wasn't a saint, but he was old school, the kind of cop who believed in facts over assumptions. He'd been quiet during my arrest, said little, just watched. Claire had picked up on that. So when she called and said she had something, he agreed to meet, no questions asked. They sat in the back of a diner off Route 27. Claire slid a flash drive across the table. Everything you need is on there, she said. He's been stealing for months. My husband didn't do this. Delaney plugged in the drive right there on his laptop. His brow furrowed as he read. Minutes passed. Then an hour. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. Jesus, this is bigger than your husband. You realize that, right? Claire nodded. I don't care how big it is, she said. I care that my husband doesn't spend the next 10 years paying for something he didn't do. Delaney excused himself and made a call. Things moved fast after that. A search warrant was issued for Carver's house and office. They found the missing inventory hidden in a storage unit registered under a fake name but with Carver's fingerprints all over the boxes. They found bank statements, off-the-record accounts, crypto wallets, even a burner phone. The evidence was overwhelming. But the best part? A full video file recovered from the remote server Claire had dug through showing two masked men loading the equipment into an unmarked van 30 minutes before I ever stepped near that part of the warehouse. When the police came to arrest Carver, he didn't fight. He just looked tired. Defeated. Maybe he'd known it was coming. Maybe he thought I'd just roll over and take the fall. Maybe he didn't know what kind of woman Claire really was. He was booked on charges of grand larceny, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. But even with him behind bars, I still had to wait another full day before they let me out. Claire was waiting outside the station when they released me. I walked through those doors in the same clothes I'd been arrested in, stinking of sweat and stale air, but I didn't care. She ran to me, threw her arms around me, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I could finally breathe again. I told you I'd fix it, she said into my shoulder. And she had. God, she really had. I thought that would be the end of it, that I could go back to my life, my routine, maybe even pretend none of it ever happened. But I was wrong. The warehouse dropped the charges, sure. The cops cleared my name. But the damage was already done. Word spreads fast in a town like ours and rumors stick like tar. Some people still looked at me sideways when I walked into the grocery store. Some whispered when I passed. And at night, when the house was quiet and Claire was asleep beside me, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, reliving the moment the handcuffs snapped around my wrists. It haunted me. The humiliation. The helplessness. The sense that no matter how good you are, how hard you work, someone can still destroy your life with a single lie. Claire saw it eating at me. She never pushed, never asked me to talk when I wasn't ready. But one night, she sat on the couch beside me and said, you know, this could happen to someone else. Someone who doesn't have a wife who knows how to hack into encrypted servers. I smiled, but I knew what she meant. That's when the idea started, not just clearing my name, but telling the whole truth. Publicly. We contacted a local journalist Claire trusted, a woman named Tanya Miller, who'd once covered a corruption scandal at City Hall and didn't shy away from uncomfortable stories. We handed her everything. The documents, the videos, the emails. Tanya spent 2 weeks verifying it all, and then she dropped the article like a bomb. Front page. Security guard framed for $200,000 theft inside the warehouse scandal that almost ruined an innocent man's life. The story exploded. Local news stations picked it up. Radio talk shows started dissecting it. People suddenly had opinions, lots of them. Some were angry at how easily I was accused. Others were amazed by Claire's role in the investigation. And slowly something shifted. I wasn't that guy who probably stole from work anymore. I was that guy whose wife saved him from prison. I got calls from people I hadn't heard from in years, former coworkers, high school friends, even an old supervisor who offered me a job. I didn't take it. I wasn't ready to go back into that world just yet. But it felt good to know the tide was turning. And yet, beneath all the noise, all the interviews and praise, I couldn't shake one question. Why me? Why had Carver chosen me, of all people, to take the fall? Claire had a theory. She thought maybe he saw me as disposable. Quiet. Predictable. Easy to discredit. And maybe she was right. But the truth? I think he underestimated love. He didn't know that the quiet guard he tried to ruin had a wife who would burn the whole system down to protect him. After the article went viral, things didn't just settle down, they accelerated. I started getting messages from strangers. Some were victims of similar setups, Workers accused of crimes they didn't commit, people who'd lost their jobs, their reputations, sometimes even their families. They wrote to thank me, to thank Claire, to say that hearing our story gave them hope. One guy, a former warehouse supervisor from Missouri, told me he cried reading the article, said it felt like someone had finally put words to the hell he'd gone through. That shook me. Because I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. What happened in that warehouse wasn't a fluke. It was a symptom of something bigger. Something rotten in how companies treat their workers, in how quick people are to point fingers without facts, in how justice isn't always about truth, sometimes it's about who has the better story. That's when Claire suggested we take it further. She said if we've got their attention, we might as well do something with it. So we started a blog. Nothing fancy, just a place where we shared everything. The full documents. The investigation process. Step-by-step breakdowns of how she found what she found. We even added a forum where other people could post their experiences or ask for advice. At first, it was small, a couple dozen readers, maybe a few posts a day. But by the end of the first month, we had over 10,000 subscribers. Claire quit her job not long after that. Said she was tired of working for someone else. Instead, she started consulting full-time, helping people facing false accusations, training lawyers on digital forensics, even doing webinars about system vulnerabilities. I stayed mostly behind the scenes, writing blog posts, responding to messages, talking to people who just needed someone to say, I believe you. It wasn't glamorous and it definitely didn't pay what security work did. But it felt real. It felt right. Still, the weight of what had almost happened never fully left me. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, remembering the way the officers looked at me like I was scum. Like my whole life could be summed up in a clipboard and a digital access log. Sometimes I'd stand in the shower and wonder what would have happened if Claire hadn't been who she was. If she'd panicked. If she'd doubted me. If she'd given up. But she didn't. And because of that, I was free. Not just from prison, but from something worse, from being forgotten. From being erased by a lie. And that kind of freedom? That sticks with you. The day Carver's trial began, Claire and I sat on the worn wooden bench outside the courtroom, her fingers laced tightly with mine. We didn't speak much, there wasn't anything left to say. We had already lived through the worst of it. Now it was about closure. About seeing justice do what it was supposed to do the first time around. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs and tension. The prosecution laid out their case with cold precision. They had the documents, the surveillance footage, the storage unit keycard with Carver's prints, the fake invoices. It was overwhelming. I almost felt sorry for him, the way he sat there in that gray suit, shoulders slumped, as if the walls around him had finally given up holding him together. But then I remembered the look on his face the night I was arrested. That smug satisfaction. That tiny smirk when he told Claire, sorry, sweetheart, your husband really blew it. And whatever sympathy I had, it evaporated like steam. Because it hadn't just been about money. He hadn't just framed me, he'd played God with my life. And he hadn't blinked doing it. Claire testified for nearly 2 hours. She walked the jury through her investigation, showing them screenshots, logs, decrypted files. She answered every question with clarity and calm, never once wavering. I watched the jurors as she spoke. Watched the way their eyes widened, the way some of them scribbled notes like their pens couldn't keep up. She wasn't just convincing, she was undeniable. And when she stepped down from the stand, I saw something in the judge's face I hadn't expected, respect. Not for the system. Not for the attorneys. For her. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I told them about that night. About the shift. About the cameras going dark and the sudden, suffocating panic of being accused of something I didn't do. I told them about waking up in jail, not knowing if I'd ever see my wife again. About the shame. The fear. The crushing disbelief. And I told them how Claire saved me, not with a miracle, but with skill, grit, and a refusal to let me be destroyed. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Carver was sentenced to 12 years without parole. He didn't look at us once as they let him out in cuffs. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Victorious. But I didn't. I just felt tired. Like we'd been carrying a weight for too long, and now that it was finally gone, our arms didn't know what to do. That night, we went home, opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving since our anniversary, and sat on the back porch under the stars. Claire leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "It's over." And for the first time in months, I believed her. Life after the trial felt like walking out of a dark tunnel into sunlight. Everything looked familiar, but nothing felt the same. The world had kept moving while we were trapped in that nightmare, and now we had to figure out how to fit back into it. People stopped me on the street, not to judge or accuse, but to thank me, to shake my hand, to tell me how brave I was. I didn't feel brave. I felt lucky. Lucky to have Claire. Lucky that the truth had clawed its way to the surface before it was too late. But also, if I'm honest, angry. Angry that I'd had to be lucky at all. Because for every story like mine, there are a dozen others where the truth never gets out. Where the innocent stay behind bars. Where the system shrugs and moves on. Claire didn't let me stew in that anger. She believed in using it. Channeling it. Do something with it, she said. Make it count. So we expanded the blog into something bigger, a non-profit, fully registered, fully staffed. We called it ClearGuard. A place where people falsely accused of workplace crimes could come for help, legal advice, digital investigation, emotional support. We brought on volunteers, lawyers, tech experts, former law enforcement officers who still believed in justice. We set up a hotline. We started telling more stories. Real stories. People began coming forward in waves, some whispering through tears, some yelling in rage, all of them broken in some way. Claire took on case after case, sometimes working 16-hour days, eyes red and fingers flying across her keyboard like a surgeon under pressure. I handled the people, the phone calls, the interviews, the sleepless nights where someone on the other end just needed to know they weren't crazy. We couldn't save everyone. That hurt. But the ones we could help? We gave them their lives back. And that meant everything. But not everyone liked what we were doing. We started getting emails, threats, mostly anonymous. People accusing us of stirring the pot, of shaming good companies, of encouraging lawsuits. Once, someone slashed our car tires outside a courthouse in Pittsburgh. Another time, a brick was thrown through our office window with a note taped to it that said, "Liars protect liars." It was scary, sure. But it also proved we were making noise in the right places. Claire installed cameras everywhere after that, updated our security protocols, and kept going like nothing had happened. That was her way. No fear. Just focus. I asked her once, during one of our rare quiet moments, why she'd done it all. Why she hadn't just walked away when it got hard. She looked at me, eyes tired but sharp, and said, "Because no one else was going to fight for you. And if I didn't, who would?" Those words stay with me. Because that's the truth at the core of everything we do now. When the system turns its back, when justice forgets you exist, sometimes all you have is one person who refuses to let go. And if you're lucky, that one person can change everything. Months passed and the world started to feel normal again, or at least, our version of normal. Claire and I had built something real from the ashes of everything that had nearly destroyed us. ClearGuard was growing faster than we could manage, and the demand was overwhelming. Every week brought in more stories, more people desperate for someone to believe them, more families on the edge of collapse. We had interns now, a small legal team, even a media consultant who helped us navigate interviews and control the narrative when things got too heated. But through all of it, Claire stayed grounded. She never let the spotlight blind her. While reporters called her a hero and people online treated her like a digital crusader, she kept her head down and her heart focused. "I didn't do this to be famous," she said one night while we were cleaning out old case files. "I did it because I couldn't stand to watch them erase you." Her words hit me hard. Because that's what it had felt like, an erasure. Like someone had taken a black marker to my life and crossed out everything good. My job. My reputation. My sense of self. I don't think people understand what that does to you, being accused of something so far from your character that even defending yourself feels surreal. It makes you doubt your memories. Your instincts. You stop trusting your own mind. And the worst part? You see the way people look at you differently. Like you're stained. Like even if you're proven innocent, you're still that guy. The one who almost went to prison. But Claire never looked at me that way. Not once. Even in my lowest, filthiest, most broken moments, she saw the man she married. That unwavering belief, that defiant love, it pulled me back from the edge more times than I can count. And now, as we sat in our modest office space, surrounded by files, coffee cups, and the constant ping of incoming emails, I realized something. We weren't just helping others reclaim their names. We were reclaiming ours too. One day we got a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, smudged with what looked like tears. Inside was a photo of a middle-aged man standing outside a courthouse, his arms around two teenage boys. On the back it said, "You saved us. Thank you." Claire stared at it for a long time, her fingers trembling slightly. Then she placed it in a frame and set it on the windowsill. "This," she whispered, "is why we keep going." We didn't have a roadmap. We were still learning, still stumbling, still figuring out how to navigate this new mission we'd taken on. But we had purpose. And we had each other. And that was more than enough. Because when the world tries to bury you, sometimes all you need is one person who knows how to dig. The first anniversary of my arrest came faster than I expected. I hadn't marked the date on any calendar, hadn't mentioned it out loud, but the moment I opened my eyes that morning, my chest tightened and the memory crashed down like a wave. Claire noticed it before I said a word. She always did. She placed a hand on my back as I sat on the edge of the bed, hunched forward, eyes lost in a 1,000-yard stare. "It's just a day," she said gently. "It doesn't get to own you." And maybe she was right. Maybe it was just a date on the calendar. But it was also the day the floor dropped out from under my life. The day I learned how quickly trust can be shattered and how thin the line between ordinary and ruin truly is. We didn't do anything special that day. No speeches. No posts. No symbolic gestures. Instead, we did what we always did. We worked. We answered calls. Helped a woman in Ohio whose employer had accused her of embezzling lunch money from a school cafeteria. Talked to a man in Nevada whose warehouse logs had been tampered with just like mine. We listened. We believed them. And with every person who reached out, I felt like we were pushing back against something bigger than just wrongful accusations. We were pushing back against the silence, the shame, the invisibility that so often comes with being falsely accused. That night, Claire and I sat in our living room with a couple of beers and the TV off, just listening to the wind outside. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we didn't figure it out?" I asked her. She didn't answer right away. Then softly she said, "I try not to. Because it scares the hell out of me." And it did. It terrified me. Because I was so close to losing everything, not just my freedom, but the core of who I was. If Claire had hesitated, if she hadn't fought, I might have disappeared into the system, just another name on a docket, another statistic. It made me realize how fragile justice can be when no one's looking. How quickly truth can be buried under procedure and protocol and paperwork. And how few people get it, Claire. That's why we couldn't stop. We couldn't burn out or slow down or let the fear win. Because there were still too many people out there with stories like mine, people who hadn't found their way back yet. Who were still sitting in cells or empty apartments or cold courtrooms waiting for someone to believe them. We weren't just fighting for them. We were fighting for the version of me who never got out. And we weren't done yet. The further we got from the incident, the more I began to understand something that had eluded me in the chaos. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a systemic failure. It wasn't just Carver who'd wronged me. It was the entire framework that had let it happen, unchecked assumptions, lazy investigations, corporate indifference. I started to see patterns in the cases we handled. A lack of due process. Employers eager to scapegoat. Law enforcement too rushed to ask the right questions. Claire saw it too, and it lit a fire in her. She started speaking at conferences, writing op-eds, giving interviews not just about our case, but about the cracks in the system that allowed so many others to fall through. She wasn't just the woman who saved her husband anymore. She was becoming a voice, one that people actually listened to. But it wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Clients who disappeared. People who called begging for help and then ghosted us when it came time to go public. We got sued once, a frivolous defamation claim by a company whose name showed up in a report Claire wrote. It got thrown out, but it rattled us. Another time, someone tried to hack our site, flood our forums with spam, and crash our servers. Claire locked it down in hours, teeth gritted, fingers flying, face pale but furious. "Let them come," she muttered. "I dare them." There were nights we fought. Not about the work, never about that, but about the toll it took. Claire would push herself too hard, skip meals, stay up until dawn parsing through server logs. I'd beg her to slow down, to take a day, to just breathe. And she'd snap, "If I slow down, someone else pays the price." It wasn't about martyrdom. It was about urgency. She knew better than anyone what could happen when no one listened. And she refused to let that be someone else's fate. One night, after a brutal week filled with back-to-back interviews and a gutting case involving a veteran fired under false pretenses, Claire finally collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. She looked over at me, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse, and asked, "Do you think we're actually making a difference?" And I didn't answer right away. I walked over, picked up the framed photo from the windowsill, the one of the man and his sons, and handed it to her. "We already did," I said. "And we're not done." She smiled, slow and tired but real. It was in that moment I realized something else. This story, our story, wasn't just about survival. It was about impact. And it wasn't over yet. By the time our second year of running ClearGuard rolled around, we were no longer just a small operation with a good story. We had become a recognized force, not in the flashy, headline-grabbing kind of way, but in the way that made companies pause before sweeping things under the rug. Lawyers started calling us before trials asking for forensic analysis. HR reps contacted us off the record trying to understand how to prevent the kind of disasters we specialized in unraveling. Even a few skeptical cops began to reach out, curious about how we'd found things they'd missed. And through it all, Claire remained the center of it, calm, tireless, methodical. She didn't want fame. She wanted change. I watched her transform in those months. She had always been sharp, but now she was lethal professionally, intellectually. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When she spoke, people leaned in. They listened. Because she didn't waste time on ego or posturing. She cut through the noise and spoke in facts, in patterns, in evidence. And when she told a room that someone had been wronged, it carried the weight of a gavel. Meanwhile, I became the softer side of Clearguard. I was the one who listened, who sat on late-night phone calls with crying men too embarrassed to admit they'd been set up, who reassured wives, parents, siblings, who showed up to courtrooms to sit beside people who would have otherwise faced it all alone. It didn't matter that I wasn't a lawyer or a tech genius. What mattered was that I knew what it felt like to be on the floor of your life, bleeding out trust by the second. And I knew how much it meant to have just one person reach down and say, "I'm here." But even as things grew, the trauma never fully faded. I still had moments. Moments when someone in a uniform looked at me too long. Moments when I heard a door slam too hard, or when I passed the warehouse district and my stomach turned to stone. PTSD, they called it. Claire tried to get me to see someone. I said I was fine. I wasn't. But I also knew that healing wasn't linear. Some wounds don't close with time. Some stay open just enough to remind you who you are. And who I was had changed. I wasn't just a man who'd been falsely accused. I was a man who'd come back from that, who'd rebuilt something stronger in its place. With Claire. Always with Claire. She was my partner in every sense of the word. My defender. My anchor. My equal. Together, we weren't just surviving anymore. We were building a legacy. It was sometime in mid-October when the invitation came, a simple envelope with a government seal tucked among the bills and flyers on our front porch. Claire opened it first, skimming the contents with her usual laser focus, then looked up at me with a faint, disbelieving smile. "They want us to speak at the Justice Reform Conference in D.C., she said. "Keynote slot. Together." I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard her right. Me? A keynote speaker? I was a guy who'd barely survived a bogus arrest, not a politician, not a scholar. But Claire just nodded like it made perfect sense. They want the story. Our story. And they want people to understand how close the system came to destroying a life that hadn't done anything wrong. So we went. The flight was short, the nerves long. I rehearsed my part a dozen times in hotel mirrors, palms sweating, voice cracking, while Claire stood calm as ever, helping me tweak sentences, polish transitions. She had spoken at events before, legal panels, academic roundtables, but this was different. This was national. This was televised. And this was personal. The room was packed that day. Lawyers, judges, policy makers, activists, every kind of powerful person you could imagine. I scanned the crowd, feeling like I was about to walk a tightrope across a canyon. But when I stepped onto that stage and saw Claire standing beside me, all that fear shrank down to something manageable. Because I wasn't doing this alone. I never had been. Claire spoke first. Her voice was even, deliberate, layered with conviction. She laid out the facts of my case like a surgeon making an incision, clean, precise, revealing the rot underneath. She didn't dramatize. She didn't need to. The truth was damning enough. And when it was my turn, I told them what it felt like to be taken in like a criminal. What it felt like to be abandoned by the system. What it felt like to sit in a cell and realize the world had decided who you were before you had the chance to speak. But more than that, I told them what it felt like to be saved. Not by a miracle. By a woman. By love sharpened into steel. The room was silent when we finished. Then applause. Long, rising, thunderous. Not just for the story, but for what it represented, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the system could be better. That people like Claire could force it to be. Afterward, people lined up to shake our hands. A senator. A Supreme Court clerk. A professor from Harvard Law who said she wanted to teach our case in her next class. I smiled and nodded and thanked them, but all I could think about was how far we'd come from that freezing security booth and the stale smell of holding cells. We'd walked through fire. And we hadn't just survived. We turned it into something that could light the way for others. After the conference, things changed again, subtly at first, then like a flood. Requests poured in from organizations across the country. Podcasts. Documentaries. Law schools asking for guest lectures. Claire was cautious. She didn't crave the spotlight, didn't trust it. Stories are easy to sell, she said. Solutions are harder. But she also knew the power of visibility. If our story could spark reform, if it could prevent even one more person from enduring what we had, then it was worth it. We signed with a public interest legal coalition based in New York, not for money, but for reach. They gave us access to better tools, a national network, and legal muscle we'd never had before. ClearGuard tripled in size within 6 months. We brought on trauma counselors, a pro bono legal director, and even hired a few former clients, people who had once called us in desperation and now wanted to give back. The energy in the office shifted. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was movement, momentum. But with growth came pressure. Claire was constantly in meetings, flights, calls that stretched past midnight. I tried to keep pace, but it wore on me, the endless weight of stories, each more heartbreaking than the last. One night, after reading a case file about a man in Mississippi who'd spent 9 years in prison for a theft he didn't commit, I broke down. Claire found me in the kitchen, lights off, bottle half empty in front of me. I couldn't speak. I just looked at her, eyes hollow, throat raw. She didn't lecture me. Didn't tell me to pull it together. She just sat down beside me, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered, "You don't have to carry it all." But I did. Or at least, I felt like I did. Because for every person we helped, there were 10 more we hadn't reached. And some nights, it felt like trying to drain the ocean with a teaspoon. Still, we kept going. One case at a time. One life at a time. Because even if we couldn't fix everything, we could fix something. And for the people at the center of each story, each wrongly accused, each betrayed by the system, that something was everything. We didn't get used to the heartbreak. That was the truth. It still hit us like a train. But we learned how to live with it. How to turn it into purpose. Claire said it best one night as we walked home from a meeting, "We may never see the world completely fix itself. But we're building the part of it that should exist. And that's enough." And somehow it was. I never imagined that a story born out of humiliation and fear would become a cause, a calling, even a kind of crusade. But that's what it had become. And as ClearGuard grew, it began to take on a life of its own, separate from us, yet shaped by every decision we made, every late night spent poring over evidence, every tearful phone call we took at 2 a.m. from someone who thought no one would believe them. We weren't just offering support. We were offering something people had been starved for: belief. Dignity. A fighting chance. It wasn't always easy. We lost cases. That's the part nobody wants to hear. Sometimes the evidence was too far gone. Sometimes the system had already ground someone up too thoroughly. And when that happened, it hurt. It left us shaken, questioning everything, wondering if we were fooling ourselves. But then the next call would come. A father. A sister. A quiet voice barely holding itself together saying, "I read about you. Please, help." And we'd remember why we started. We began building an archive not just of legal documents, but of stories. Testimonies. Snapshots of lives nearly stolen by falsehood. It became a living record, a testament to the unseen war being fought in courtrooms and conference rooms and interrogation chambers all over the country. Claire curated it with the care of an artist, arranging names, dates, outcomes, reflections. Sometimes I'd find her in the middle of the night, sitting at her desk, one hand on a mug of cold tea, scrolling through a timeline of pain turned into proof. And then something happened we never expected. The Department of Justice reached out. They'd been following our work, watching the cases, reading the reports. They wanted to meet, not to silence us, not to threaten us, but to collaborate, to learn. That first meeting was tense, heavy with the weight of everything we'd been through. But by the end of it, something shifted. One of their senior investigators pulled Claire aside and said, "You've done something we couldn't. You made people care." It wasn't validation we were after. But still, it meant something. Because maybe, just maybe, the tide was beginning to turn. That night, Claire and I walked back to our hotel in silence. The streets of D.C. were lit with soft yellow glow and the air was thick with early summer heat. As we crossed a quiet bridge, she slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing all of this?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. Because the truth was right there, between our joined hands, in the rhythm of our steps, in the fire that still burned beneath every quiet word. We had nearly lost everything. But now we were building something indestructible. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at Claire when she wasn't looking, in the middle of a meeting, her brow furrowed in concentration, or on the couch at home, buried under a stack of case files, lips pursed in that way she always did when she was piecing together the truth like a puzzle. And I'd feel this quiet, overwhelming awe. Not just because she had saved my life, though that truth still lived in every beat of my heart, but because she had turned that act of salvation into something that outlived the moment. Claire hadn't just pulled me from the wreckage. She'd built a road out of it, one that others could walk too. There were times I wondered how she carried it all. The pressure. The expectations. The weight of knowing that for some people she was the last line of defense between them and ruin. She never complained, not once. But I saw it in her eyes, the fatigue, the moments of quiet when the fight caught up to her. And I loved her more fiercely for it. Not for her strength alone, but for her refusal to let that strength harden into distance. Claire still laughed at my dumb jokes. Still danced with me in the kitchen when the coffee was brewing. Still kissed my forehead when she thought I was asleep. Through it all, she never stopped being Claire. And maybe that was the most powerful thing of all, that she had endured and remained soft where it mattered. We took a break that winter, the first in over 2 years. A cabin in Vermont. No laptops. No phones. Just snow, quiet, and the feeling of air that didn't buzz with urgency. At first, we didn't know what to do with the stillness. We kept reaching for our devices, kept scanning for a call that never came. But by the third day, something shifted. We remembered how to just be. We built fires. Took long walks. Sat for hours saying nothing, yet feeling everything. One night, as we watched snow fall thick against the windows, Claire turned to me and said, "If the worst had happened, if you'd gone to prison, I think it would have broken me." Her voice cracked a little, and I took her hand, held it tight. "But you didn't let it," I said. "You didn't break. You broke through." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening with a pain that time hadn't quite healed. "I think part of me did break," she whispered. "But the part that mattered? The part that loved you? That part got sharper. Meaner. Stronger." And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by snow and scars and survival, I realized something I'd never been able to say before. I hadn't just survived because of Claire. I had become because of her. And nothing, no system, no lie, no shadow of the past could ever take that away. When we returned from Vermont, something had shifted, not just in us, but in how we saw the work. It wasn't just about righting wrongs anymore. It was about endurance. Legacy. Claire began drafting what she called the blueprint, a structured system for how other communities, even countries, could replicate the ClearGuard model: small investigative units, digital forensics support, trauma-informed response teams, and legal advocacy rolled into one. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't about headlines or camera crews. It was about roots, infrastructure, sustainability. She wanted this to outlive us. I watched her pour herself into it night after night, tapping out frameworks, calling lawyers, coordinating with software developers and former public defenders. And as I watched her, something clicked in me. For so long, I had felt like the one she saved, a life resurrected, a man stitched back together. But now I began to see that I wasn't just the rescued. I was the reason, the proof, the pulse behind the mission. And with that realization came purpose that burned like a second heart in my chest. I began mentoring new clients directly, not as their legal guide, but as someone who'd been through the storm. I created workshops, started speaking in community centers, unions, even high schools. I talked about what it felt like to be falsely accused, yes, but also what it meant to come out the other side. To rebuild. To reclaim. The message was always the same: you are not what they say about you. You are what you choose to become after. Meanwhile, Claire's blueprint started catching fire. Universities invited her to teach modules. Local governments requested pilot programs. Even the Department of Justice circled back, this time with a budget proposal and a handshake that wasn't just symbolic, it was real. Tangible. Change was coming. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. One afternoon, as I was closing out the day's last client file, I looked across our office cluttered with whiteboards, sticky notes, and a dozen empty coffee mugs, and saw Claire staring out the window. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were full of something deep. I walked over and stood beside her, our shoulders touching. "What are you thinking?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "I think I'm finally proud. Not just of the work, but of how we didn't let it destroy us." I put my arm around her, and for a long moment we just stood there, watching the city pulse beneath us. We had started in a booth. A cage. A lie. But now we were here, not just free, but louder than the silence that had once tried to bury us. And we weren't done yet. The first time I visited the warehouse again, it felt like walking into a ghost story I wasn't sure I was ready to tell. Claire didn't come with me. This part was mine. The new manager had invited me, a different guy, fresh face, clean records. He said they were launching a new employee rights initiative and wanted me to speak. I hesitated at first. I didn't know if I could stand in the place where it all started without my throat closing up. But Claire squeezed my hand and said, "Go. Take it back." So I did. I walked through the same loading dock, the same corridors, the same security booth that had once felt like a coffin. But it wasn't the same anymore. It couldn't be. Because now every corner echoed with what had come after: the fire, the fight, the rise. I stood in front of 200 employees that afternoon, most of them in uniforms just like I used to wear. I told them my story. The good, the bad, the parts that still made my voice shake. I didn't hold anything back. And when I finished, there was silence. Not because they didn't understand, but because they did. One woman came up to me afterward, tears in her eyes. She said her brother had gone through something similar but never spoke about it. "I think now maybe he will," she whispered. And that alone made the whole day worth it. Back at home, Claire was waiting on the porch, her laptop closed for once, 2 cups of tea beside her. I sat next to her, and for a moment we didn't say anything. Just watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky bleeding orange and purple like an open wound slowly healing. "I went back," I said quietly. She didn't ask how it went. She just nodded. "Did you feel it?" I looked at her. "Feel what?" "That it doesn't own you anymore." And I did. I hadn't even realized it until she said it, but it was true. The fear. The shame. The haunting. It was still there, yes, but it didn't rule me. I had walked into the place that tried to erase me and left it intact. Stronger. Whole. We toasted that night, not to the past, but to the road ahead. Because we knew the work wasn't finished. Injustice didn't take weekends off. But neither did we. And now, more than ever, we were ready to keep going. Not because we had to, but because we could. As the years unfolded, our lives began to settle into a rhythm neither of us could have imagined back when this all began. We weren't chasing vindication anymore. We had it. We weren't running from the past. We had stared it down, cracked it open, and used the pieces to build something that mattered. ClearGuard had become more than an organization. It was a movement. A community. A kind of sanctuary for those who'd been swallowed by false accusations and spit out by systems that treated justice like a guessing game. But the truth is, it came at a cost. There were days when the weight of other people's trauma pressed against our ribs like a second heartbeat. Days when we had to turn off our phones and just exist in silence. Claire and I learned how to protect each other through it, how to hold space without fixing, how to listen without absorbing. She would place a hand on my chest when my breathing got too shallow, whisper something grounding, usually just my name. I'd make her tea in the middle of her coding marathons, rub her shoulders, make sure she ate. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real. And it kept us human. Then came the award. A national human rights group reached out, said we were being honored for extraordinary civilian impact on systemic justice. There'd be a gala. A stage. Speeches. I laughed when I read the letter, partly from disbelief, partly because if someone had told me 3 years ago I'd be accepting an award for anything, I'd have asked what kind of drugs they were on. But Claire, ever pragmatic, just nodded and said, "You're going to need a suit that actually fits." The night of the gala, I stood at that podium, heart thudding like a drum, lights in my eyes, and saw hundreds of faces looking back, some familiar, some not, all waiting to hear the story they thought they already knew. And I told them not just the facts, but the feeling, the panic, the betrayal, the quiet terror of knowing the world had already decided your guilt. But then I told them about Claire. About love that doesn't just endure, it fights. It reclaims. It resurrects. When I stepped off the stage, people clapped, cried, stood. But all I saw was Claire at our table, smiling the way she had the night she first told me, "We're going to fix this." And we had. But more than that, we had changed it. Transformed a private hell into a public engine. One case at a time. One voice at a time. One truth at a time. It's strange looking back now. Not because I don't recognize that man, the one sitting in a holding cell, wrists cuffed, hope bleeding out by the second, but because I do. I remember every breath, every shiver, every broken thought that crossed my mind that night. And I think about how close I came to never getting out. To being buried beneath someone else's lie, forgotten by the very system meant to protect me. That memory is no longer something I run from. It's something I carry not as a scar, but as a banner. A reminder. Claire and I still run ClearGuard, though these days we've stepped back from the day-to-day grind. We've trained others to lead, mentored teams in cities we've never even visited. What started as a desperate mission to save one life has grown into something bigger than we ever dared to dream. I sometimes sit in the back of our small office headquarters, the one filled with mismatched chairs and whiteboards that never stay clean, and listen to the buzz of voices, the tapping of keys, the sound of change being made in real time. And when I think of Claire, I don't just see the woman who fought for me, though she'll always be that first and fiercest. I see a leader, a pioneer, a force so unshakable that even the system had to reckon with her. And I see us not as survivors of some past injustice, but as builders of something new. Something enduring. I'm spoken to hundreds of people by now in courtrooms, classrooms, churches, jails, and I always tell them the same thing. I know what it feels like to have your truth ignored, to be shouted over by evidence that isn't real, to feel like you've disappeared before your story even begins. But I also know what it feels like to be seen, to be heard, to be believed, because someone believed me, and that belief saved my life. If there's anything this journey has taught me, it's this: you don't need an army to fight injustice. Sometimes all it takes is one person with the courage to say, no, not this time. Claire was that person for me. And now, every time we help someone else, I see that same light spark in their eyes, the moment they realize they're not alone, that their story matters, that the truth still has a chance. So here it is, the final truth. They said I was a thief, but my wife proved I was worth saving. And in doing so, she gave the world something it didn't even know it needed. Together, relentless, unbreakable, home.